Hi, I'm Madonna Guy. Welcome to The Natural Alternative. I'm here today with Peter Kahler, Australia's naturopathic expert in anti-aging and longevity. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Madonna. It's going to be great to be able to talk about something that's so amazing and so interesting, in the longevity and anti-aging, movement. And this space is very new to us all. So I'm looking forward to having a good chat about it.
So what drew you into this space? You've been a naturopath for as long as I have, so decades. So what drew you into the anti-aging and longevity space?
Well, I think the interest was there, from a young child. Interestingly enough, I can remember myself at 7 years of age. Mum and Dad bought me a little microscope, and I had leaves under there and bugs, and I'd draw them in a little notepad. I remember that. So in 25 years later, here I've got a heme of you, and I'm starting to look at blood, and it's amazing how time moves on, and you're still doing things that are similar to when you were young. So I was always interested in medicine and biology and the world around us and how it operated and ticked. And then I had grandparents two grandparents that lived over 100. So that was very interesting to observe that and to watch that and see how they lived. And unfortunately, at the end of their life, they were, dementia and various aging diseases had really got them. And I said, well, that's not the way you want to live in your last years.
Yes.
And experience those, but still, I could see. Well, hold on a second. People are living a lot longer. That can live over 100. Whereas we've only been told 75 or 80 years of age. So some of these things were always underneath, trying to figure out how we can be healthier and how we can live longer. And so, once I got into clinical practice, I was very much looking at reversing disease, preventing disease, knowing that the diseases are what's aging us. So yes. How could we do that? So it was sort of just a step-by-step process until I got about 10 years ago. We really got a big boom in understanding longevity and how extending life and looking at genetics and looking at the biochemistry of the body. And that really fascinated me. And I could see we were already working in that area. So yes. Decided to go in further and do more studies and do more education and research and now into the longevity practitioner space. So
has that more been as more information's come out about individual genes that it's been allowing, or is it more about the telomeres? Like what specifically has it been that has changed in, say, the last 10, 15 years that's allowing us to go into that anti-aging and longevity space naturally?
Yeah, well, I mean, in the early 2000s, we had mapped the human genome. So we basically had a huge amount of information at our fingertips. But then it was starting, the last 20 years have been delving into that mapping of the human genome to get specifics and get more understanding out of it. And then about 2008, 2009, scientists developed what's called the 9 hallmarks of aging. And these are hallmarks that are responsible for the aging and gene transcriptions and problems that are occurring. And those hallmarks are things like genomic instability and stem cell exhaustion and autophagy or senescence issues that are going on. So there's 9 of these hallmarks. So as science started to delve into this, our genome, we could see all these things starting to occur. And then scientists were coming along and saying, well, how can we prevent that? How can we reverse it? How can we intervene to prevent some of those 9 hallmarks of aging, or all of those 9 hallmarks of aging from progressing? So again, in the scientific community, there was a progress, as well as, just like it was with my interest in longevity, was a progress. So
yeah, because I remember going back on that, and once again, I can't remember how long, but say 10 or 15 years when they first started talking about the microbiome at seminars. And they'd say, oh, we've got 1,000 different species in the gut. Oh, and then the next time you'd go, oh, we've got 2,500 species in the gut. Oh, we've got 10,000 species in the gut. Oh, Neanderthals had 20,000 species in the gut. So it's been really interesting watching it evolve.
Yeah, and then we had that problem of then we developed tests to be able to test the microbiome and all the genes and give us a mapping out of that, but we still don't have a lot of information on how to influence, how to intervene and influence it. So that's still very young as well. So even though we are getting, even in the longevity space, we're getting tests, we're getting clocks, we're getting epigenetic marker assessments to tell us how old we are, to tell us maybe how long we can live, all these types of things. But we really are still in an infancy on what we can do with that information and how we can intervene. There's some very, very good things that have come up so far, which we'll discuss later, but there's still huge amounts of information on there, just waiting to be discovered, which is fantastic.
And even just good old water. I remembered someone saying a few years ago, you're drinking chlorine and fluoride in your water, you're basically destroying your gut biome, your microbiome every time you're having water. It's antibiotics in your gut.
Yep. Yeah, so, absolutely. As simple as that. So I suppose to a certain degree, it's the fundamentals that we in our Western society are either missing or being impacted by that are causing a lot of problems, and we need to sort of start to back off on those, track those back, re-educate people, help them to understand that some of these fundamentals are, that's the place to start. Change the things that you can see and you know about, and then work on the unknown. So water is a fantastic, place to be starting. Our foods, our water, our environment, our sleep, our fitness, the pollutions we're exposed to. There's so many things there that we can be doing, which is, we must start there.
So where do you start with a client? Like, what are the first things that you kick into, whether it's testing or whether it's dietary? Where do you sort of start?
Yeah. The first real thing is to come in and start to assess where somebody's at. So as I said before, let's find out the knowns. Let's go through biomarkers. Let's have a look at how much inflammation is present. Let's have a look at the function of cell. Let's have a look at symptoms that are going on. Let's have a look at lifestyle pathways. Let's look at history and family history that's coming through and the genetic profiles. Let's start gleaning all this information and gathering it together to get some indication of where that person, where the organism's at. What it's been impacted by, how resilient it is, how much disease is there, how much, is developing, where's somebody at? So that's always your first port of call from a practitioner perspective, with longevity. And then you can start to say, well, what are we going to bat at? So I've broken it into my treatments into two parts. One is the disease side of things, to reverse disease or to slow down the progress of a disease, or to
the diabetes,
manage it. The diabetes. If someone's coming in with blocked arteries, or trying to reverse that. If people are coming in with different problems, obviously younger people coming in that don't display a lot of those diseases yet, fantastic. The less we have to deal with, the better. So you can get straight into some of the in-depth stuff if you've got younger clients with very little disease. But the problem is, of course, we've got people in their 30s and 40s now on 4 different drug medications. We're oftentimes seeing that from their GP. Then they move into their 50s, and that's another 1 or 2 added to the list. By the time they're in their 70s and wanting to do something for their health and wondering why they're declining so fast, they can be on 8 or 10 various drugs at different times. So it is about trying to work on those things first of all, and reverse those and get some sort of management of those diseases.
Yes.
The second part then is more the anti-aging, the longevity side at a genetic level. We've identified a group of genes that are responsible for those 9 hallmarks of aging around, senescence and autophagy, around insulin sensitivity, around proteins and breakdown, around digestion, even around the way that different molecules are working. So these genes influence those behaviours in the body. So we can now go in, and they're just trying to work on drugs at the moment that can work on these 9 hallmarks of aging. I'm going down the pathway of natural molecules that we've found that influence those 9 hallmarks of aging.
And what I've found is that the natural molecules are actually so much more powerful than the medical ones generally, because things like sulforaphane works on well over 200 genes. So when you're getting the natural things in there, you're actually getting a bigger effect.
Yes, that's right, exactly right. And we do have scientists out there that are talking about the studies that have found that, say, drugs like metformin, rapamycin, and these types of drugs have influences on, say, mTOR genes, on AMPK genes.
So metformin for diabetes.
Yes, metformin for diabetes. So over in the States, of course, a huge amount of longevity and anti-aging proponents are taking it and using it all the time. Here, we've got to go to our GP and get it prescribed. But cinnamon is a metformin mimetic.
Right.
So it's been shown to mimic the action of metformin in those gene pathways, in that insulin sensitivity, and helping with those AMPK signaling pathways. So in my mind, rather than taking a drug that has other side effects and other, detrimental activities to it just because you want to try and influence the gene, can we use something natural like cinnamon to do that? And they're the types of nutrients I'll prescribe. They're the types of nutrients that we're looking at pushing, further studies and trials on over the coming years. So they're very interesting. Yeah, and resveratrol.
Resveratrol. Fantastic. Yes. Of course, that's why I love my Pinot Noir.
Absolutely. And I mean, I was going to say with resveratrol just as a molecule, absolutely fantastic with regards to cardiovascular disease, with regards to now they've just completed a big study. I put it up on my Facebook page about, it was about 18 months ago, on postmenopausal women between 45 and 85 years of age. And they gave resveratrol and marked, this was a long-term study done over 2.5 years, following all these people in the trial, and found big changes in cognitive behavior, brain function, reduced dementia risks. So why wouldn't you be using these types of molecules as ways of slowing down the pace of aging, or reducing down your biological age, helping you feel better every day?
Absolutely.
So these are the types of, the things that I want to fund and push more of that research going forward. And we do have already huge amounts of science and information related to a lot of molecules, and we'll go through some of those molecules that are most highly studied ones. And it's just fantastic, but we want more. We want to explore more. We want more trials. We want more of this information.
Yes. Because there's so many studies, but there's a very definite anti-natural thing going on the planet at the moment. So it's wonderful that there is funding and trials still going on. Yes. And that was one of the things that I've been impressed with some of our scientists in Australia and in the US that I've been connected with over the years. They've just managed to get many, many published studies to prove that natural works, and it works well, and it works effectively. Yep. And just as strong as these drugs a lot of the time, or that's as effective, as these drugs.
Yep. And then I do get a huge amount of biohackers through and contacting me, and a huge amount of people that are interested in life extension. But they're saying, oh, look, isn't it fascinating that what they've found about these CRISPR genes? Isn't it fascinating how we can do this 3D printing? Isn't it fascinating how we can do, they've found these particular drugs that can do this. Now, it's probably 20 years before they will be available to Mr. and Mrs. Smith on the street corner down here. It could be 20 years. And they said, well, once that all comes out, then we'll be right into it. I said, well, what are you going to do in the meantime? Oh, we're waiting for those drugs. I say, no, we've got so many things at our fingertips right now that we can be doing to extend life and improve health. And it's just educating people about that and getting that message out there, which is why I'm excited to talk to you.
And at the moment, they don't know the side effect of those technologies either.
No, that's right.
So it's so new that I'm sure there's going to be the other side of the coin down the track as well.
Yes, absolutely. And then you take that drug for that over there, but then you have to take another one to mitigate the side effects of that one. So before you know it, you've got this chemical cocktail in there that no one's ever studied. What happens when you put a blood pressure medication in with metformin, in with Panadol, in with, say, an antibiotic? What happens when you put all those four together in one system? Well, we don't know.
And then whack 3 jabs in 3 months as well. It's just it's an interesting
minefield, and we will find a lot of that information out, unfortunately, but we do need information. Information does make us more powerful to be able to make better decisions and to know where to go to repair, a lot of people out there.
So firstly, let's chat about the 9 markers of aging.
Hallmarks of aging, yes. So in about 2008-9, there was a big program run by some of the big anti-aging conferences around the world, and they got scientists together and they developed this 9 hallmarks of aging. I'll just read them out so that you sort of have a bit of an understanding of what we're talking about when we talk about hallmarks. So and they're not in order. So these are the 9 things that influence the way we age, the pace of aging, the breakdown of the human body, that we feel that there can be interventions created for.
Yes.
So genetic instability, so the code that's in our cells, so unstable code, damage to code, protein breaks, DNA instability and genetic processes. Telomere attrition, so the telomeres, the little shoelace, little plastic tips on the end of our shoelaces that stop the shoelace from unraveling. Our chromosomes have those, so they shorten as we age due to inflammatory markers, pollutions, a whole range of different things that the human body's exposed to will shorten those telomeres. So when they shorten, short enough, obviously, then the chromosome can unravel and cause breaks, and we get accelerated aging. So there's programs and drugs being designed to, and there's natural medicines for being able to increase up those telomere lengths again.
I remember one study they did with kids who had chronic illness. I'm sure you would have heard this in your study. But basically they were looking at the parents' telomere lengths of the kids in hospital with chronic illness.
Yes.
And they thought that the telomere length in the parents was going to be short and damaged, but it had nothing to do with that at all. What they ended up finding was the parents' perception of the children's health affected the parent telomere length.
That's
so amazing. The brain had total control over the telomere length. The more stressed we were, the shorter the telomere.
Yep. Absolutely, and the word stress, oftentimes people just think, oh, that's my boss, that's my partner, that's my situation. But stresses are anything. The truck that just drove past belching fumes at you. Yes. You know, the fast food meal that you just had down the road as you socialised, that extra 2 glasses of wine that we had that night. All of these are stressors. You know, it's the stresses that are influencing, you know, the telomeres, and of course the epigenetic is very much our emotional state, our mind-body-spirit connection is very much in there as part of this, the repair of telomeres and all these 9 hallmarks of aging, our mind, body, the state of our mind, body and spirit.
Yeah,
I suppose as practitioners, really, the bottom line is that with each person that sits in front of us, each person that has been brought into our care is to look at those 3 areas, mind, body and spirit, and make sure they connect well and they're all being looked after.
Absolutely. Sorry, continue.
That's okay. So genetic instability, telomere attrition, epigenetic alterations, which we just talked about, you know, loss of jobs, you know, pollutions in the environment that we live in, the amount of money we have in our bank account, you know, all of these are part of our epigenetics. Funny enough, it's not an internal, it doesn't have to be an internal thing. The amount of inflammation we've got, the pH balance of our tissue, all of these things are part of our epigenetics. So alterations in that as the decades go on. That was the third one. Loss of proteostasis. So again, the ability for proteins to be able to build and to manufacture. Proteins designed for bone growth, for muscle growth, for tissue repair. As we lose that ability to link proteins together and break them down through deficiency sometimes, through genetic mismessaging, all of those things will create then a more frail body. And I think that's where we see a lot of frailty come through. You know, you start seeing people in their late 60s, into their 70s, into their 80s, becoming more frail, more withered, you know, harder to get around, less mobility, you know, less upstandingness. And that's just that loss of that, you know, that tissue, that, you know, strength that we've got in our body. So
is that partly connected? Remember, there was a study done, Dr. Flavio Catigiani was talking about 5 years ago. He said that since the 1970s, men's testosterone has halved, sperm amounts have halved in the previous 50 years compared to the previous 50. And they've recently redone that again in 2017, I believe.
Yes.
So,
exactly
I imagine that reduction in hormones, and, you know, women are just as messed up as men. That's not a anti-male thing. But, you know,
no, that's exactly right. Well, I've got a, you know, oftentimes things that I talk about, you know, in our 30s, we're getting major shifts in our microbiome. You know, in our 40s, we're getting major shifts in our hormonal balance and stability. In our 50s, we're getting major shifts in mitochondrial function. So as these decades progress, we are getting shifts, and that's what we're talking about: menopause, andropause, a number of things that happen to the human body to cause more of this sarcopenia or this muscle loss, you know, bone degradation, the inability to build up and to restore.
So I always tell my sarcopenic clients that they're skinny fat.
Exactly
and it's sort of, you know, and like compared to people our age who go out there and we can see the young teenagers, they don't look like we looked when we were kids.
No, that's right.
Seem to have more muscle 40 years ago than what 30 years ago than what the kids do now.
Yes.
And it seems to be that whole lifestyle and diet and, you know, all those obesogens in our foods.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're exactly right. And I think it's about identifying the times that people are going through those processes in the human body, and realizing too that a lot of those processes are occurring because of our, as you say, our Western lifestyle now compared to 30 years ago, 50 years ago. So you could probably have shifted by 20 years, a lot of those. It'd be 50s that we'll be getting the change in the microbiome, and 70s we're getting changes in hormonal aspects, but it's all been accelerated due to our you know, xenoestrogens that are coming in through affecting hormones and our lack of fitness.
All the plastics and pesticides and herbicides and toxins. It's awful.
Huge, you know, and part of longevity for me as well is the ability to detoxify. So gut and liver is still, those naturopathic principles that are the cornerstone of naturopathic medicine are still part of the longevity space. And that's being missed when someone says, go and take metformin, because that's going to influence your AMPK and your mTOR and give you some longevity. And I said, yeah, but if your gut and liver are not processing, is not working and not balanced, it doesn't matter how much metformin you take, it's not going to have the effect. So we do have to do some of these underlying, foundations or fundamental healings, with everybody to begin with.
Because I had heard one of the other side effects of metformin, and you might be able to correct me because this was quite some time ago, was that it can change it can change any cell in the body to be able to sop up fat. So instead of just having that excess fat storing in the abdomen, having that inflammatory gut, being linked in with diabetes, metformin can change any cell in the body to sop up fat.
Yeah.
If that's still...
Yeah, so what it's actually doing there, as opposed to changing the cell, it's actually triggering a messaging cycle within the cell to tell it to uptake, that glucose to uptake, fat to uptake those molecules into it.
Right.
So any cell then, if that mechanism is on high alert to be looking for glucose, it'll take it in, even though it's not meant to do it. It's not designed to do that.
Excellent.
That is still... Yeah, they have done further studies on that to see why metformin does that. But that is still true.
Okay.
So those side effects on various drugs are still a big part of, for me, and in my understanding and training and mindset is, first, do no harm. We don't want to damage anything. In trying to do something good over here, we're causing just as much damage over here.
Exactly.
We don't want to do that.
Yeah. Okay, so where are we up to? Was that number 5?
Lots of homeostasis, deregulated nutrient sensing. All the receptors and the signals that are being transmitted all around the body, those signals are being disrupted. We're not picking up those messages correctly. So a cell's just going, it thinks it's going along its merry way, but it's not doing all these particular functions that it's supposed to be doing. And it tends to be, if we can start to, that's a little bit too that comes about because of the abundance of nutrition that we've got nowadays.
Yes.
So there's so much nutrition. We've got fridges in every house. We've got a corner store and a fast food takeaway place on every corner. We've constantly got snacks. We're constantly eating. And that's one of the areas that intermittent fasting and calorie restriction and those types of techniques in health and in longevity come to the fore, where they're controlling that abundance of nutrients, and that obviously helps not to overwhelm the receptors, so we're not getting so much input and nutrition into the system that the cells just switch off.
Yeah.
But this disarray in nutrient sensing is one of those hallmarks that we can find interventions for.
Yes.
And again, these 9 hallmarks, from my research, are not the be-all and end-all. There are a large range of different mechanisms and hallmarks, I think, associated with aging. But these are some of the ones that sort of capture, some very easy to see and study responses within the body and to develop interventions for.
Yes, yes, and that there's wonderful natural interventions for.
That's right. Yes. Yeah, well, in that dysregulated nutrient sensing, another part of that is the AGEs, accelerated glycation end products. So when we burn toast, when we barbecue food, when we have the blackened things that are on foods and overcooked, these particular things are disrupting a lot of the signaling and the nutrients and putting far more incorrect types of sugars into a cell.
So do those blackened, the burnt things, do they affect everyone badly?
Yes.
Because I remember when people started talking about getting your genetic, testing done like 10 years ago, they were saying, well, some people might have the gene and some people might not have the gene, for that being an issue. But that's been found now that that's not good for anyone.
Yes, that's right. So you might not be, if someone's got the gene for specifically, having problems with those burnt, those particular sugars, obviously will have an accelerated and a worse issue with those types of foods. But every human body is going to be influenced in some way through these AGEs. And rage, it develops inflammatory cytokines, it develops insulin spikes, it develops a whole range of different conditions in the human body, whether you've got the gene that causes age problems or not.
Yeah, I was just thinking, as a kid, my mum, we always joked that mashed potato was grey because she would always burn the potatoes in the bottom of the pan. And so I think the first time I ever had mashed potatoes, I joke, is when I met my husband when I was 19, and he cooked mashed potatoes and they were white and fluffy. And I remember all of my siblings having similar stories at one stage or another. And we used to think our chops when we would cook the chops, and snap them.
Yep.
They would be so cooked you could snap them and like beef jerky.
It is interesting, the olden days did have some beneficial, parts of cooking and foods, that we could probably take a leaf out of how our grandparents did it. But then on the other hand, there were things like that there were major, problems within the cooking process.
Yeah. Mum, what did you do to me? Yeah.
Eat your burnt offerings, and offer it up. You'll be right.
Straight out of the Bible. Yep.
That's it. That's it.
Cool.
Exactly.
Okay, that's good.
So nutrient sensing, mitochondrial dysfunction. Now, of course, mitochondria is the word, the big buzzword at the moment.
Yes.
And should be. Mitochondrial dysfunction is something that is very easy to improve and to get working better. But it's why are these mitochondria dysfunctional? Where are they going? How can we regrow mitochondria? How can we switch them back on again? How can we get them being more effective? And this mitochondrial dysfunction is one of those very easy things that we can intervene with.
Yes.
But that is part of that those 9 hallmarks of aging. So, I mean, nowadays there are the big nutrients around, of course, the NADs, the nicotinamide riboses, the NMNs. These types of things have found to be big mitochondrial stimulators.
So can you chat a little bit about each of those? Because the mitochondrial disease, the main thing people are going to know is the exhaustion. The exhaustion, fibromyalgia, things like that, just not having that energy to get up and do their day. But they might not be thinking about mitochondrial dysfunction because every cell in the body has got mitochondria.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So if we're seeing mitochondria that are exhausted, we're seeing less numbers, we're seeing damage to those mitochondria. Of course, that tissue where the damage is not going to be repairing, regenerating, rebuilding. We're not getting signaling sent out to get stem cell delivery. There's a whole range of things that are going on within that organ. So if we're talking about the brain, if the mitochondria in the brain are not functioning properly, we get the symptoms of brain fog and memory concentration, recall problems, memory, a whole range of that cognitive decline. But deep underneath, we're not repairing, we're not regenerating, we're not got that neuroplasticity that's occurring, we're not accessing all the hemispheres of the brain. So we're aging so much quicker and getting more dull, if you want, day by day, if those mitochondria are down. So the importance of recharging the mitochondria, of being able to make them more energetic, will allow then the brain to heal, the brain to be able to regenerate and to continue to function the way that it should. So tired mitochondria, it's not just about the fact that I'm really tired and I can't go down to catch up with some friends. It's about what's going on internally in that tissue because you're tired. You're not getting that regeneration repair process.
Yeah. No, cool. Thank you.
It's fundamental.
Yeah.
So if we're talking about, there's different molecules. I mean, naturopathically, we've used vitamin B3 for a long time, and I still use a lot of those activated, the nicotinamides and nicotinic acids, the niacinamides, all these types of things convert into NAD, which the mitochondria they use in the engine of the cell to uptake ATP and to generate energy in that cell.
Yes.
A few funky labs are going in there and saying, can we put something else in that can maybe supercharge it better than B3? And that's where they've come up with the NMN and the NAD, specific NADs, sort of the next step along the chain or the reaction that B3 goes through. But not necessary for most of us. A good activated amounts of B3 going in is fantastic.
Yes.
Ribose, coenzyme Q10. There's a range of different things. Resveratrol, which we mentioned before, all of these actually have NAD increasing potential within the mitochondria.
Yeah.
So again, switching those back on again. So as we age, we see more and more accumulation of these dead mitochondria or ineffective mitochondria, very low actioning mitochondria. We're getting more and more of those as we age. So, part of age reversal would be if we can switch them back on and regenerate them, sort of like giving them putting the defibrillator on them and giving them a spark and getting them working again. We can get back our health, and we can get our youthfulness, we can get our longevity back.
Yeah, beautiful.
So
okay, so mitochondrial dysfunction.
Mitochondrial dysfunction, obviously protect them, repair them, regenerate. Cellular senescence. So senescence is another word that's being used at the moment, which is the accumulation of cells that are past their use-by date. They're not working anymore, but the immune system and various lymphatic processes are coming along and clearing the body of those dead cells or those sluggish cells. And so they just sit there and they accumulate and they get more and more, and they start to secrete all sorts of messages and inflammatory markers, which then affect all the tissue around them. So it's this domino effect of further and further dysfunctional cells and tissue. So our body has a mechanism in there to be able to go through and to clear these up, and to our macrophages and phagocytic activity to clear away a lot of this dead debris, if we want to call it, that's clogging up the system. So cellular senescence and senolytics are
So we're trying to stimulate apoptosis or something with that?
Yeah, apoptosis. Well, a lot of those cells are already dead. So we don't need to, or close to it. And they just sit there. So yes, the apoptosis, when something does die, there should be signaling being sent to the people, the crew to come along and clear that away, and that's not happening.
Right.
So it's a twofold problem. The crew aren't getting the message to come and clear away, and these dead cells are just continuing to accumulate and build up.
Yeah.
So we've really
because I heard there's a similar process that happens in the brain overnight. So the brain shrinks by about 20% overnight, and then I don't think it's the lymph, but basically there's like a wash that goes through the brain and cleans out all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Through the cerebral spinal fluid. It will come up and flush the brain out and flush a lot of that debris away. People with spinal injuries and back problems. I mean, how many people out there have sore backs and painful backs, or have surgery or go to osteopaths and constant. So anybody with that tight inflammatory process is occurring, you're impeding on that flushing process. Anybody that's not sleeping well, that particular process is only occurring as we get into sort of layer 5, 6, and 7 of our sleep. If you're only getting down to layer 3 or 4, you're not getting into those deep rejuvenating and flushing processes. So, so how many people don't get any deep sleep? So, or sleep long enough. So there's a range of things that can impede that as well. But cellular senescence or autophagy is a word that we use a lot with an autophagy is going in and eating up and getting rid of all this debris. We can also have autophagy when we're talking about fat mass. So when we're burning fat, we're going into autophagy to burn that up and remove fat to get rid of fat mass. If we've got a spur on our shoulder or something like that, and we're removing that spur and dissolving it, that's an autophagy process.
Okay.
If we've got plaque inside our arteries, we're eating up, removing, getting rid of substances that shouldn't be there. And that goes down to cells. And so cellular senescence are those cells that are dead, clogging up the system, sending out all these other messages that cause inflammation, and that accelerates the whole disease process and aging. So there's a lot of studies being done around senolytics, different drugs that they're going in to try and clear away dead cells. We know a lot of natural substances. There's a lot of work being done on things like quercetin as a senolytic. Rice bran is in there as well, wheat brans. There's a number of different molecules that we have in natural foods that have a senolytic action that improve autophagy. So that's one of the hallmarks of aging. Stem cell exhaustion. So stem cells, again, the ability for cells to be able to go out and repair and regenerate and rejuvenate a tissue, become depleted. Our bone marrow becomes depleted. We're nutritionally depleted to reduce these cells. The signals aren't getting around. We're inflamed in tissue, or there's so much inflammation that the stem cells coming along they're really not even making a dent. And that's especially the case, say, in smokers. There's constant stem cells going to smokers' lungs, constantly trying to repair it, to regenerate it. But all they're doing every hour or two is having smoke. They're damaging. So the stem cells just say, well, I'm exhausted. I can't keep up with this amount of damage.
Yeah. And I heard that the more fibrin there is in the body, so fibrin released from the liver when we're in stress or pain or inflammation, the more fibrin there is in the capillaries, then the stem cells can't actually get into where they need to go.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. So they're barred access to a lot of the areas that they need to be going to send their messages and to become those healthy cells that they want to become.
Yeah.
So that's absolutely true as well, and that's that inflammatory process. And I think that's where intermittent fasting concepts come in where we're putting in, say, the same amount of calories we normally would, but in a smaller window of time, allowing then this huge window of time over a day period where we're not digesting, we're not processing, we're not insulin spiking, we're not inflamed, we're able to sort of switch into these other mechanisms like autophagy, clearing fibrin, lowering inflammatory responses, getting all these nutrient signaling pathways working, through those times we're not eating. Yeah. So I do that. I have 2 really good meals a day and put it into a 6 or 8 hour window. Yeah. So that allows all that rest of that time for a lot of the body to do its job. Yes. Rather than eating it, we have breakfast at 6, we have morning tea at 10, we have lunch at 12, 12:30, we have afternoon tea at 3, we had dinner at 6, and then we have a snack or supper, at 8, 8:30. So all we're doing is digesting and processing all these calories all day.
Yes, and eating is inflammatory.
That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly right. And I remember our old naturopathic principles of eating, breakfast like a king, lunch like a prince, dinner like a pauper. So even that is okay, from the perspective of, how our sleep cycle works and the amount of inflammation and things like that. But we can even tighten that up a little bit and not have, 12 hours of eating or 14 hours of eating. We can lower it, put it into a smaller window of time.
Because all sorts of things happen with intermittent fasting. It's quite powerful, isn't it? So, I think for every 12 hours we do without eating, for every 1 hour after that, we're doubling the impact of the previous 12 hours.
Exactly right. So 12 hours has definitely been shown to show positive impacts on the body, quite exponential gains in the sort of 16 and 8. So 16 hours not eating and 8 hours putting your 8. So there was a big jump between 12 and 16 hours if you're fasting.
Yes.
And then there was a little bit more gain at 18 and 20, but then after that it plateaued off. So I just tend to do 16 and 8, just suits living in a city and my social life and things like that as well. I can still function that way without too much trouble. But
so for those who haven't read much about intermittent fasting, what are the key things that improve with intermittent fasting?
Yep. Okay. So the major process there that we're looking at is insulin secretion, insulin management, insulin resistance. So those group of markers in the body improve when you're putting food in a small window of time and leaving a larger window of time where you're not digesting and eating food all the time. So insulin is a big one. Glucose itself, so glucose markers, glucose management. Very powerful improvements in those, and we can see a lot of people coming away from that out of the diabetic funnel. Instead of moving in and towards diabetes, they're moving away from it just purely by instigating things like intermittent fasting.
Because a lot of people would be fearful doing that, wouldn't they? Because generally the diabetic practitioners are telling people to eat regularly through the day. So I imagine you'd have to get through their brain,
Sure. If somebody is a diabetic or insulin taking insulin and medications for it, then we work slightly different. We guide them and we start smaller windows and then just increase it up and manage them. But the majority of people aren't like that. They're just wanting to prevent diabetes or to lose some weight or to sleep better or to feel better. And that's where you can use these techniques without any problems at all.
Yes.
And we oftentimes find people that do get low blood sugars or things like that will say, I've got to eat every couple of hours, otherwise I get these low blood sugar. We find within 7 to 10 days of intermittent fasting that those symptoms go. Yes. So their bodies come into a sync and they go, this is fantastic, I like that. And it gets rid of all those low blood sugar.
And quite often they've been eating the wrong thing as well. Yes, so they think that they need to eat every couple of hours, but that's because they're going carbs.
Yeah, that's right. They'll have a snack here, they'll have fruit there, even if they think they're doing it healthy. It's fruit, it's gluten-free crackers, it's the things that aren't going to be beneficial for them.
Yes.
So and I go, look, it's sometimes hard to get people to change foods to really, even though that is our underlying fundamental process that we want with a person sitting in front of us, is to re-educate them, to inspire them to eat better and do better. It's a long haul for a lot of people and it's difficult. So something like intermittent fasting could be a really quick intervention that can get really good results while you're working on trying to change people's dietary behaviours.
Nice.
So, and then other things like autophagy, like we mentioned before, the increase in the amount of surveillance and gobbling up of senescent cells and fat mass and various things like that are quite pronounced with intermittent fasting. We do get better sleep cycles. A lot of people now are using equipment to track their sleep. So some of the Garmin watches and the Fitbit, I've got an Oura ring. So different things like that can manage your sleep and monitor it and see how you're going. We can see big improvements in those markers just with sleep when people adopt intermittent fasting.
Yeah, okay.
So it's quite interesting to see the wide variety of benefits that can come from something like intermittent fasting or calorie restriction. CR is the other term that's used, but that could be not smaller window. That just means eating less.
Yeah.
If we can take 30% out.
Has a lot of this anti-aging and longevity research come out of the blue zones?
Yes, well, probably the fundamental understanding where they've gone into these blue zones and they said, okay, well, let's have a look at how these people are living. And they've done blood tests, they've done genetic tests, they've done various, biomarker assessments, they're looking at lifestyle assessments, taking all that together and going, wow, well, these people over there, they've never stepped foot in a gym. They're still out there in their fields working at 105. They might only be doing a 6-hour.
I don't see the doctor regularly.
Exactly. They're not going to their GPs. What's going on here? So from there, that understanding, well, let's go in and have a look. And so they do tests on them. They don't see anything untoward around the genetics. It's not like they've got some sort of superhuman gene base in these blue zones. So then they came in and started to look at how much of an influence their life, the way they lived, had on these people, the foods they ate, when they ate, their purpose within their communities, the reason for living these long lives.
And I think that was one of the things that was definitely, because some of them drank alcohol, some didn't, some were vegetarian, some weren't, some ate lots of fish, some ate lots of red meat.
Exactly right.
But I think
there wasn't anything.
Yeah, I think it was the community, that sense of purpose, that spirituality that was really connected with all of them.
Yep. Yeah. And I think, part of my job as a longevity practitioner is to try and create those blue zones within our own homes.
Yeah.
To find that purpose for our living, that connection again with our family and our communities, to look at our surroundings and how we can improve those things. Yes, I prescribe and I give nutrients and I work on diet and those various things like that. But that sense of purpose, that reason, that connection, is so important. We lose that a lot in our Western communities and cities.
Yes.
Everybody falls unto their own. Where your fence stops, there's no further interaction with those around us.
Yes. Yeah, I heard someone say this morning that community originally came from common unity. Mm-hmm. So we need to get the common unity back in community.
Yes. Yep. That's right. That's right. And I mean, it's one of those things, especially when we're talking to people about the fact that most people in their mind, they're thinking, well, I've got 75 years. If I get to 75 or 80, I've had a good innings.
Yes.
So once I start talking to people about, well, what if I was to get you to 90 or 100 or 110? Oh, wow. Well, I said, well, there's got to be a reason. There's got to be a purpose for wanting to do that. If you're not interested in that, or it doesn't, you don't have connection, or you can't develop that connection and purpose, then no, you don't want to live longer. So those people that are living longer have that real sense of belonging and that grounding within their family's community and a purpose, the reason to live, the reason to get up each morning.
Yeah. And yes, and I think that's a challenge, though, isn't it? As a practitioner, helping people, because sometimes people have never thought about it. I saw someone this morning who I have not seen in 12 years. She's been up in Darwin working, and she said, I'm having the same problem I had 12 years ago. I don't know what my purpose is here. So her first purpose was getting her daughter through school. Done, tick. We went, right, done. Now it's time for you. What's next?
Yeah, exactly right. And it's not made any better by society, in our work. I mean, we call it ageism, or we're ageist, where a lot of employers are sort of saying, well, once you get into your 50s or 60s, you're past your use-by date. And there's a lot of stigma put in around that. And they're really looking, well, how quickly can we get you to retire? And there's a lot of that comes into people and really suppresses and oppresses people. So we do have to have a powerful purpose outside of all these things that achievements, that we want to work with. What do we want to leave? You know, what sort of legacy? How do we want to be remembered? You know, what's something we can give back?
Yeah.
You know, rather than always being milestones. Okay, well, I always work on milestones with people. What do you want to achieve? What do you want to achieve? What do you want to achieve? But then those can become empty sometimes for people, or they lose sight of those. But if they've got a purpose for why they're wanting to be, you know, connected and with their people and still be around in 20 years or 50 years, that really starts to get people thinking and starts to ignite a flame in them. You know,
what does having back pain, neck pain, shoulder pain, what does it stop you from doing? What do you want to be doing out there in the world? Yeah. Because there's no point getting to 100 if you spend the last 20 years of it, you know, on your couch.
Yeah, exactly.
Watching TV and being miserable in pain. Yeah.
Well, that's what I found with those two grandparents I mentioned before. One was 101, 102. They made it to around that 85, 90, which was great. One of them had a fall, broke their hip and fell over. So obviously osteoporosis there. The resultant, 3-4 months in hospital, plus all the drugs, just the inflammation, the sedentary, all that, just then started to progress, dementia. My grandmother went into dementia around 85, 90. So even though they made it to 100, 102, they had no mind. What's the point? Yes. And I looked at that and I said, there's got to be another way. We've got to have both our mind and our body going together strong. It's no good having a strong body and no mind. Yeah. It's no good having a great mind, but your body lets you down and you die of some physical disease. So we've got to have both of them working together at once.
And I find about, I don't know, I'm guessing, but just say 90% of my elderly clients are chronically dehydrated. Mm-hmm. Do you remember about, 10, 15 years ago when people were on blood pressure medications, they started freaking out about potassium and water? Yeah. So all of a sudden, people started being told that they shouldn't drink more than 600 mils of water a day and not to have anything with potassium in it. And I was like boggled, going, what the hell is going on here?
It's ludicrous. And actually, I remember specifically with a lot of my patients with blood pressure problems, I would teach them that there's 2 clinics over in the States that treat blood pressure problems just with water therapy.
Wow.
So that's all they do is water therapy, and they rehydrate, and they do it in systems and under supervision. They work and they can get their blood pressure under control just using water therapy.
Yeah, and I had a pharmacist. I had a pharmacist friend a long time ago, and she used to train her clients who would come in and pick up their blood pressure medication to drink 3 litres of water a day. She said part of the mechanism of this are going to work through the kidneys to make you excrete more fluid. So therefore, if you don't keep your fluid in your body, you will be dehydrated. Yep. So I think it's about a 20-year from beta blockers, particularly beta blockers, cholesterol drugs, and some of the antidepressants. They all shrink the brain by about 5% per year each year we're on them. And many of these drugs people are on for decades and decades.
Yep.
So the end result is
not realizing it's through that, a lot of that water leaching and the fluid, dysregulation that's occurring, that we're getting a lot of that shrinking, and really bad.
Yeah. So from the brain perspective, because that's something like I saw a stat yesterday, they're talking, they've been saying it for a long time, but they're saying that 1 in 2 of us by the year 2050 will have dementia, which, the stat, it's already bad over 60. It's pretty hideous. So from a dementia perspective, it's the same stuff, isn't it?
Yes.
Because everything is
exactly
the brain,
right.
It's inflammation.
Yep. So and all these 9 hallmarks of aging will all have some implication on the brain. So if the mitochondria, like we were talking about before, start to get depleted and destroyed and non-functional, if we've got inflammatory processes allowing different tissue breakdown, if we've got signaling problems, if we're not getting enough nutrition up into the brain, good nutrition because of poor food choices, if we've got high stress responses, if we've got hormonal imbalances, which we've got quite a few glands in the brain that should be secreting and they're not effective anymore. All these things are going to be starting to have that drive towards the cognitive decline and then moving into dementia.
Yeah.
So it is about that, working on all those processes to try and restore brain function. And as I said, it's no use having a really strong body if your brain lets you down and you don't know where you are. Yeah. There's no use having a great sharp brain if you die from some sort of physical ailment and complaint and your brain's still going strong. We've got to keep both going strong.
Yes.
And coming back to that water, like you were saying, oftentimes we're told scientifically that 1 litre for every 25 kilo of body weight. So that 3 litres is, oftentimes very, very spot on the mark. It might not be 3 litres of water for some of my people. It might be 2 litres of water, and the other litre can be, their green tea, can be their bone broth, can be other liquids that they're putting in. I'm happy with that as well. I see great benefits from that, but it's got to be that amount of liquid going in a day is very important.
Yes. And what sort of testing do you do on clients for anti-aging and longevity?
Yes, so it changes a little bit to our usual let's find a disease, although we are doing that obviously from a longevity perspective. I want to know if there's cancer growing. I want to know if someone's heart, arteries are blocked. I want to know how much inflammation is present and damaging, because they're parts that I need to reverse or to manage better to get an extended life. However, we are looking more down at mitochondrial function, as we said before, how those particular cells are working, looking at oxidation, a lot more inflammatory testing, looking at cytokine levels, looking at POX inhibitors, prostaglandins, having a look at a range of these inflammatory markers. Where are the interleukin series, which ones are there, which ones aren't, immune function, thymus activity. So there's a range of different tests like that we would be looking at to try and ascertain the potential somebody's got. What could claim you? What could you die from? How fast are you aging? And to me, it's not even about giving somebody a number. Well, you're 60 years of age, but really you're 75. It's not about that number. It's the pace of aging or the acceleration of that aging that I'm trying to find.
Yes.
And that's where I talk about slowing the pace of aging. So that's the first thing to do, is slow it right down. That's going to give us extra years, straight away.
Yes.
So
it will prevent disease. That's the other thing that's wonderful about naturopathy, because we're working on so many angles at the same time. They don't know what they could have progressed into, but by looking after their health now, anything can be prevented.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, these are fundamentals to try and get through to people, to get them to understand, and it is about, they are developing, more and more tests now around the world with these epigenetic clocks and biological age predictors. Death predictors. So there's a lot of information going on in those sort of areas that we can start to maybe over the coming 10 years use more successfully to get more specific. But it really is, if I come in to somebody and I lay out those results for people and say, look, these are the areas that are going to cause this disease, this is the area that's going to cause this pain, this inflammation is going to lead to this, we've got to reverse all those. That's where they really pick up and listen. As opposed to, and sometimes, I understand the benefit and the motivation of giving people an age. The bioimpedance analysis machine that we use would always do that, and people would be horrified. So it does give motivation. I've got to do this, try and reverse it. But
I never tell people their age. It's really bad.
If it was over 99, I didn't tell them.
But I've got some people who go, "Yay, I'm down to 91."
Yeah, I know. Yeah, and then they're just going out and having their 42nd birthday. Yeah, well, look, it's the pace of aging, it's the acceleration that I'm really concerned about, that I want to pull back on and reverse. And so there's quite a number of tests. So the process of even looking at your sirtuins, the actions of sirtuins, tests to see what mTOR pathways are like, AMPK. You can do tests around cell defenses and redox balance. There are a number of great assessments we can do to see what's functioning, what's struggling, what's not functioning, what deficiency we've got. That all gives us as a clinician an idea of where to treat and how to guide that person. And then I test a lot of my patients. I'll test every 3 to 6 months and make sure that we're getting a change in those biomarkers, because many people take nutrients. How many people out there, they take their resveratrol, they take their vitamin C, they're taking their coenzyme Q10, they're self-verifying, even thinking that they're doing great, but they don't know, they haven't tested.
Yes.
So that's what I provide and go through those processes to make sure that they're taking the right dosage, that they're taking the right supplement, that we can guide a result, get a result and get a progress.
Yes. And with things like, what sort of testing do you do for mitochondrial dysfunction?
Well, there are NAD tests straight away to see how much NAD is. So that's the petrol that you use within the cell. So you can actually test how much, and we get those testing from overseas. Australia is still very, very behind in the longevity research space. So I've been talking to a lot of pathology companies saying, these are some of the tests that I want to start doing. They're doing them all the time in the States and in Europe. And I've got patients that I want to be able to utilise these on. They say, oh, wow, that's amazing. What are they again? And so you start to talk about it, and they said, well, look, if you can start to get to, 3,000, 5,000 tests that you would then start to perform, we may look at bringing them in to make it cost effective. But that's all they start talking about.
Yeah.
So it is hard to get a lot of testing and a lot of understanding around those tests here in Australia. So I work with a lot of overseas companies to get some of these testings in, and as well have put together my own panel of testing that we know already that's capable of checking how somebody's aging now. So the inflammation marker is absolutely incredible. So we've got 35 different markers that we can go through there to see how all different types of inflammation. We can be going through looking at we can get understandings of telomeres and stem cells through some of our standard blood testing nowadays. We can look at vitamin D levels. We can look at DHEA and hormonal profiles. There's a range of different things that are outside the norm that don't normally get done on people that will give us information on how somebody's aging, how old they are, what we need to intervene.
And do you still do HemoView live blood screening?
No, not. I did right up until when I was in physical clinical practice, but now I'm doing telehealth and virtual health with all my anti-aging clients. I can take all over Australia, New Zealand, Singapore. So a lot of clients will come through there. I'll do a lot of it online. So I don't have access to a lot of those tests. HemoView, I've been doing HemoView for 20 years. Fantastic tool.
Because I remember there was a lady talking about obesity at a metagenics seminar maybe 10, 15 years ago. And it was, the study that Dr. Pam, she talked about ACEs. She's got a TED talk called Hijacked by a Cupcake.
Yeah.
And she was talking about how she was working with a researcher and they thought, the big fat agouti mice, was it agouti? How they were designed to be fat, fair and flabby. And they thought, let's just, just for a laugh, let's just feed them nothing but greens. And the next generation came through lean, mean and dark brown. So it totally changed their genes, whereas they had been, these white, fat and flabby mice. That's how they were designed.
Yep. It's quite fascinating studies, and it's from those particular experiments and studies that a lot of scientists then have got an idea. We better let's go in and have a look at why that happened, or was it this particular gene sequence that was being activated to enable that, or like it's been explained before, were paper clips put on different genes to stop them expressing. Was that happening because of that change in that dietary process and nutritional input? So a lot of those early studies really did help to accelerate and move understanding and further discoveries in the longevity space. So, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, I loved Dr. Pam. She was amazing when she spoke at that seminar. I just, So now, Pamela Peake. Pamela Peake was her name.
Oh, that's right. Yes, I remember the cupcake phrase. So that's what made me remember that study. Yeah. Do you want me to mention a couple of the other 9 hallmarks of aging?
Absolutely.
Just to make sure that we cover off, because it'd be so interesting to get into all these other discussions we leave off.
I know, that's great.
People will be going, hey, what are the other ones? so we talked about senescence was the last one, and autophagy and clearing off all those dead cells and some of those processes. And it's actually senescent cells, I liken them to, or call them zombie cells.
So they are specific cells.
They are specific cells that are past their use-by date. They're supposed to. They haven't gone through the apoptotic process, and died properly and then been cleared out. So they're like zombies. So they're dead cells, but they're still there, and they're still sending out messages, and they're still influencing all the surrounding tissue negatively. Right. So clearing out those zombie cells is important.
Yes.
Stem cell exhaustion. So we did touch on stem cell before, and the classic example there that I gave is the smoker, that continues to hammer their lungs. The stem cells keep on coming along, getting signaling, and eventually they just go, well, I'm out of here. I can't keep up with this amount of abuse. And we do get stem cell exhaustion that way. Our stem cell pool gets depleted, our bone marrow, our nutritional value, our energetics, our electrical charge, which all helps the stem cells to work properly, gets depleted and run down. So we're not getting a regeneration or a repair of tissue.
So you more work on the processes that allow your own adult stem cells to be released.
Yes. So, and I am excited by some of the stem cell therapies that are starting to come through. I mean, we've got a huge amount over the next 10, 20 years that will come to our aid and give us better outcomes. But one thing we can do right now is we can improve, by between 6 and 12 million stem cells in our circulating pool each day. So if we're getting more stem cells there just by doing those underneath fundamentals, then we can get better regeneration, rejuvenation. And then, of course, helping people to realise some of the lifestyle things that they're doing to suppress stem cell production and to influence that, the exhaustion of those stem cells. So we can be influencing those right now. Naturally, and I think it will be interesting. I know a number of people that have gone overseas and actually had stem cell therapy done on a number of different health conditions and had good results with it. So those, but they're not available to everybody. They're not just something that they're very expensive and not something available.
They're sort of 20 to 30 grand.
20 to 30 grand for a lot of treatments, exactly. So if we can start in our own bodies to begin with. We can make some good changes that way with stem cells.
Yes.
And their activity. So, altered intracellular communication. So basically, that factors that interfere with the way the cells within the cells and to each other and within the cell communicate. So that can be electrical dysfunction and discharging going on there, especially in the positive and negative ions or atoms, electrons, neutrons, protons, all having a discord. So, of course, messaging is not going to be getting through.
With the live blood screening, I always talk to people about the fact that, when our cells are working properly, they're supposed to repel each other because of that electrical charge, the zeta potential.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And once we get inflamed and toxic, they start getting stuck on top of each other and, it's just...
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you can do it, I've done a number of tests like that before where I've, taken somebody's blood, put it on the microscope, and you can see all the cells nicely, separated from each other, looking really good, looking really healthy, nice and round, not clumping together. You go and we would both put our mobile phones underneath the microscope and get them, and we'd get the reception to ring, and they would ring, and you could see the cells clump together.
Oh, wow.
So the loss of electrical charge within those cells was quite noticeable.
Yeah, I've not done that experiment. I'll have to do it.
So something that's highly electrically charged, put that near. You can do a similar around a big magnet, especially the magnets on the back of stereos and things like that. You can do the same thing, put the blood beside that and see changes. But it is that clumping and that damage that occurs, that loss of that zeta potential is.
And do you talk to people about dirty electricity and that sort of thing?
Yep, absolutely. And I've got the book here, and I oftentimes loan it out to people that are interested in understanding EMF and its influences on
which book do you recommend?
Dirty Electricity, it's called. Just let me grab it. Donna Fisher.
Oh yeah, love Donna.
More Silent Fields. So again, cancer and dirty electricity play, the missing link. She's got a number of books there. Yes. Just easy to understand. There's been a lot of studies done on dirty electricity, on EMF. There's been lots of studies, lots of books, but she just has a really easy going manner on how to explain it and how to understand it and techniques that we can do in our everyday life to reduce.
I had her on the radio about 6, 7, 8 years ago, and it was a very mainstream audience, and she started talking about how it affects sperm and fertility and how, she had a very dire. And I sort of said, well, luckily there's things we can do about that.
Well, that's right. And it's interesting, we were laughed out of town whenever we mentioned, the effects on fertility and sperm, men having their phones in their pockets, having laptops on their laps and things like that, the impacts of those things. And no, how ridiculous. And yet then multiple studies started coming out around 2012 to 2015 showing exactly that, and mainstream studies, and then people started to swallow their words. But it does have.
Oh, they're still saying 5G is safe and effective, though.
Yes, safe and effective for out on Mars somewhere.
Yes.
So,
Okay, so what else was on that 9?
Altered cell communication we were talking about there. So they were the 9. They were the 9
Beautiful.
hallmarks of aging. So the hallmarks of aging again give us some understanding around things that are accelerating aging and causing the aging process to occur within the human body, and helps us to discover, say, some of the mechanisms responsible for those hallmarks and interventions that we can now start to employ.
Yes.
So if I look at some of these interventions, just out of interest, resveratrol lowers mTOR, which is responsible for senescent cells, responsible for proteostasis, responsible for intracellular signaling diabetes. Resveratrol lowers NF-kappa B, increases FOXO genes, increases glutathione, increases NRF2, increases NAD, increases AMPK. So we've found that these things happen within cellular structures, both human and animal studies, that a molecule like that can do that. Astragalus, very, very powerful in around work on telomeres and protecting, getting telomerase working better to protect those end caps on our chromosomes.
Is that because of its immune system function, or is there another mechanism?
No, it actually stimulates telomerase.
Right.
So again, yes, and if you do have better telomeres in, say, your in the thymus, in the production of your white blood cells and various markers, yes, your immune system will be helpful. But there are that's the beauty of natural medicine, isn't it? We can say something like astragalus, and we know it's got 12 different compounds in there doing all different things.
Yeah.
The synergistic effect of all of those. Whereas once you start to isolate a particular part,
yes,
that's where we lose all that beautiful synergistic action of a herb or a nutrient.
And can have side effects on the other side.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So astragalus, very good. Curcumin, obviously very good around the sirtuins, especially sirtuin 1 and 2. AMPK expression. It methylates and reduces mTOR. So again, curcumin and has not just as an anti-inflammatory. A lot of people just think, it's a great anti-inflammatory, but there's all these other gene aspects that it will help to either inhibit or help to express and regulate. Sulforaphane, which you talked about before with regards to cell defenses and switching on over 200 various genes.
Eating all those foods, the broccolis and wasabis and cauliflowers and Brussels sprouts.
Yeah, so we know those. So the most highly studied nutrients, if we've got in herbs as natural therapists that we've been using for longevity, resveratrol, quercetin, green tea, blueberries, astragalus, withania, ginseng, magnesium, vitamin D, algae like D. selena, ribose, coenzyme Q10, cinnamon, sulforaphane. All of these particular nutrients have been used in studies, have been studied on anti-aging longevity networks and gene transcription. So yes, it has had all the other natural medicine studies over the last 30 years that we can use, but those ones are specifically being studied in longevity models. They're being used on yeasts, they're being used on animals, they're being used on various flies, different types of things that they use for longevity studies to see if you can influence genes. Those particular ones are being used. And what I'm doing is putting all of those in together and taking those myself personally and giving those. And that's so we can get all these hallmarks being used, being actioned properly and looked after. Very exciting, very exciting.
Yeah, no, that's so
we've had them for thousands of years. We've had a lot of these molecules and nutrients available to us. So it's we're not reinventing the wheel.
Yeah. And it is interesting because people just always want the double-blind placebo studies, and there's so much out there. Like you Google any of these, there will be thousands of studies worldwide about them.
Absolutely. If you go in there and you put in astragalus and telomeres, you put in resveratrol and put in AMPK or sirtuins, you'll find a vast array of studies that are done there. So I think my job and where I'm moving forward over the coming years is being that bridge, if you want, between the scientific community, the boffins in the labs that are doing all these studies, and the person out on the street that says, I do want to live longer, I do want to have a better life, I want to optimize my life here on the planet Earth as much as possible. So being that conduit, if you want, and putting those two things together, the meeting in the middle of being able to educate, to inspire, and make sure they're taking the right nutrients and doing it the right way, and monitoring them, managing them.
Yes, because a lot of people can't even imagine living healthy long term.
No,
Because
that's it. That's it.
Because their ill health has started so young these days, like so many kids. Like I remember when kids started being diagnosed with diabetes in their teens, going back like 10, 15 years ago. And what is going on? And I remembered having my first 26-year-old kid in my clinic, and he'd had a stroke, and he was as skinny as a rake little dude. And I thought, what the heck is happening here? That was like 15 years ago. And now, what I've seen with mental health, actually, once again, it's probably about 15 years ago, I would have parents come in, their kids would be going through the usual stuff that kids go through, and the psychs want to put them on that combination of antipsychotic, antidepressant, and anti-anxiety. And it's the biggest experiment going on worldwide with our kids' brains.
That's right. Absolutely. And further shrinking of the brain every year that they're taking them.
Yes.
So, it is tragic. And we are sort of nearly programmed. It's nearly like, society and governments and processes around corporate around the world are programming us that, you've got that 40 years worth of health and, and well-being, and then after that it's decline. Once you get into your 50s and 60s, it's downhill from there.
Yeah, we're indoctrinated to think that's normal.
Yep, until 75. So as soon as I come out and say, well, look, 100's the new 50.
Yeah.
That's what I want.
Yes.
Oh, what? I said, well, what if you're 100, 50 years of, 100 years of age, but you still had the activity and the mobility and the interests and the adventure and the spark and the vitality of a 50-year-old?
Totally.
Oh, wow. So, and then you can start the discussion. As soon as you start to get their minds shift, and if you can get them past that hurdle, that's, a distinct ability. And I tell people, look, I'm in my mid-50s, I look in my mid-40s, I've got the biomarkers in my mid-30s, and I'm testing those all the time. So I'm wanting to try and maintain that as much as possible. That's slowing down the aging process. And when I can do that in somebody else, then I've achieved. So I want to try, and one of my goals is to try and help 1 million people live over 100 years of age, disease-free and full of adventure.
Yes, absolutely.
I'd love to achieve that in my lifetime. So,
an adventure for you, what is it?
Well, adventure for me is that ability to experience life. I don't want to be just sort of trapped in this one spot. I love traveling. I love my motorsport. I love, country life. I love, food. I love my family. I just want to be able to experience to the extent of my whole being all of those things in my life, rather than having health impact what I can do, when I can do it, and how I can do it.
And I think that's where we have to reach people. What are you missing out on in your life because of your health at the moment?
Yes.
Because so many people complain that they have to wait a year for the rheumatologist or 6 months for the neurologist. I'm like, well, let's start on your health now.
Yes.
Why do you have to wait for that?
And I did mention that's exactly the same in the longevity industry. People are waiting for that, final discovery in 10 years' time or 20 years' time that might help them to live to 150. I said, well, what about now? We know specifically, stop smoking, maintain a healthy weight, increase up, we have a Mediterranean style diet, get some exercise. You can add 14 years to your life expectancy.
Wow.
14 years just for doing those basic things. Now, as a society, we know a lot of people aren't going to do that. They're not interested. But for those people that hear that message, just doing something simple like that, can add 14 years. What about then adding resveratrol and cinnamon and withania and magnesium and vitamin D and some of these essential nutrients in activate gene? What about breathing exercises, meditation? What about some of the other techniques that we can be doing, intermittent fasting? All these types of things. How many more years can we add? We can add another 10, another 20.
So what can people add to their diet right now? So I know we've talked about a bunch of nutrition supplements and things. What can they do to their diet right now? Because I always like to say, well, as long as you get this and this and this, and I don't care what you remove, but I try to get them to focus on the good stuff they can add in that's going to.
Yeah, that's good. Well, look, yes, we did talk about, when you put your food in. So interestingly, just coming back to intermittent fasting, they did intermittent fasting on people that were eating a healthy diet, intermittent fasting on people that were eating an unhealthy diet. And both groups lost, weight, had improvements in their, funny enough, in their insulin markers and things like that. Both groups had benefits. So it was the actual time that you weren't eating and digesting and inflamed that was giving the benefits, as opposed to the food that was going in. So I thought that was a very interesting process. However, of course, if you went past that and then started to get into good quality eating, which is, again, a lot of us talk about plant matter as many colours of the rainbow, diversity of foods. So that's what my grandmother used to say, as many colours of the rainbow on your plate as possible. And so lots of plant matter, good quality protein, good quality fat, a little bit of carb.
Yeah.
And we were able to, to maintain that in a logical way and a simple way. If people could, you don't want to make it too difficult, because then 3 weeks later, a month later, 2 months later, people have dropped off and gone back to their old ways.
Absolutely. And I was just thinking about exercise you mentioned as well, because exercise improved the microbiome. They did footballers, so big, beefy footballers don't have the best diet in the world. According to us naturopaths, they probably consider it great. But what they found was the exercise itself helped to protect their microbiome from dodgy foods. Yeah,
it's quite fascinating how different molecules get released, when the cells are put under stress, which can have protective processes to it, and also to the way the bowels move. Waste material is moved through the digestive tract quicker in people that exercise. So we're getting better peristalsis and a faster, better transit time compared to people that are sedentary. So there was a range of other things as well that caused that improvement in the microbiome. But exercise is really that. I go down the pathway of life be in it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people going in here, what about HIIT training and what about these particular different things? And I said, they've all got benefits to a certain degree depending on what you're wanting to try and achieve. But for longevity, we're talking about being active.
Yes.
8 to 10,000 steps is all that's required, on a day-by-day basis for longevity to live. They've done studies on that to see if we can get people living over 100 years of age. Do we need the 15 or 20,000 steps? No, 8 to 10,000 seem to be the optimal number. If we're looking at resistance exercises, push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, squat, yoga, Pilates, Tai Chi, swimming, riding, skateboarding, walking the dog, wrestling the kids, all that sort of stuff, working out in your fields, in your garden, all these people in the blue zones living.
The blue zones, I was just thinking.
Again, never gone to a gym, never played a game of football. But they're just active all the time.
Because I think one of the most interesting areas of the blue zones, because there's obviously the little islands in Japan and in Italy and places like that, but the one outside Los Angeles,
Loma Linda.
Yeah. So that was more about religion and spirituality and connectedness and community. Yep. So quite close to all of the smog and everything from Los Angeles, but still had that longevity.
Yeah, there were I think there were 7 to 9 things that they found similar in all the blue zones, and they were, as you say, purpose and spirituality, under eating, eating less. So there were a range of different things like that that had that ability to help those people to live longer. That was similar through all the other zones. Yeah, quite fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah, and they did a study on a place in Africa compared to, and I think it was LA. And they got people to basically swap diets for a fortnight. So they did a microbiome check, they swapped diets, and pretty much everyone in Africa started going downhill and started getting all sorts of symptoms. The people in LA started to improve. Yeah,
and that's absolutely amazing, isn't it? And that brings me back to actually a study, reminding a study of that I talked to a lot of people about with cancer, where they got a bed of cancerous cells, and they put healthy cells onto that bed of cancerous cells, and those healthy cells became cancerous. Then they got a bed of healthy cells, grabbed cancerous cells and put them on the bed of healthy cells, and those cancerous cells became healthy.
Right.
So that environmental influence that it has and how that impacts our organism, and you can use pollution, you can use diet, you can use a whole range of things too. It's about trying to create that, that optimal environment in all of us.
The terrain theory.
Terrain, which is going to give us, those foundations to be able to build good health and have good genetic expression and regulation.
Absolutely.
Yeah, fascinating.
It is. It's amazing. So cool.
And so really what I'm trying to do is to manage this process. You can see, I mean, we could talk for weeks and weeks and weeks on all the fundamentals, not just from a naturopathic perspective, but all the science going on now. But it comes back down to, trying to resolve the confusion in people, or the where do I start? How do I go about doing this? Where am I up to? Do I need to bat at this? Do I need to bat at that? Do I need to take this? Do I need to take that? It's about managing that more effectively, and that's what I want to do for people is to give them a pathway to follow to live longer, and actually have that better health along the way.
Yes, yeah, beautiful. And just one more question before we start to close up. So do you have processes to get people to find their goals and dreams and their direction in life? Like, people who are so stuck, and I often think of, middle-aged women who have been looking after their kids, and I know this is sexist, but they've been looking after the kids, looking after hubby, they've been working, they haven't thought about themselves in 30 years.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, empty nest syndrome, they go, I don't, and quite often they cry on the table. When I do kinesiology, I say, well, what do you want to do with your life? And they say, no one's ever asked me that before.
Yeah. Well, I do obviously appreciate the benefits that come from it. I'll guide people to find good practitioners around NLP, around kinesiology, around inner child work. I love inner child work. I think one of your other talkers, presenters, had something about inner child. I love all that. Working within that spiritual realm, moving electricity and energy and blockages, I think is fantastic. But you're right, we're programmed so much through our society, and it's hard to break through that with people. And I've got a similar, it's not sexist, I don't think, to be bringing this up. What happens to women? The women are the linchpin of the family unit oftentimes, and you give everything to your partner, to your children, to everybody around you. And if there's any time left over, it's a little bit, you might have it for yourself. So I say that's where a lot of disease comes from and a lot of dysfunction's coming from in your life, because there's no time for you. It's not selfish to look after number one. And so I say to a lot of my mums, to the extent that you are, strong, vibrant, happy, connected, focused, stable, grounded, that flows onto everything around you and everybody that you touch. If you're cranky, irritable, upset, tired, in pain, frustrated and a bit insane, that's going to flow onto everything around you and everybody you touch.
Yes.
So it is, and I suppose it's that slow education to get them to understand that. And then once they realise that it's not selfish to actually look at some of these things, what interests me? What are my hobbies? What are my interests? What are my desires? What do I want out of this? It's not just all around family. I love my family, but there's more to me than my family.
Yes, and you don't have to do everything with your family.
Yeah,
I think a lot of people think it's selfish to go off and do something on their own if the hubby or kids aren't involved in it.
Yep, that's right. So maintaining that friendship network, getting out and maintaining those hobbies. So as I said before, I like my motorsport, so I don't want to get overwhelmed.
Cars or motorbikes?
Cars, rally driving. Yeah, rally driving.
Motorbike, Our grandson was born, and then we got a motorbike license 3 weeks later.
Well, the need for speed, the adrenaline junkie. But that's my interest. Ali, my wife, her interest is in pottery and art and dance. So try and still be involved in that. Have time to get down to your little studio and do things. Have time for me to go out and work on the car and mix with my mates. Those sort of things are important. Finding out rediscovering our hobbies and what interests us, because most of us aren't doing it. We're stuck in work. The other thing I do teach a lot of my clients and patients are the 888 therapy that I work on, which is 888. So it's 8 hours work, 8 hours play, 8 hours sleep. So trying to get into their head again, and it won't be exact, but it's just trying to get back into the head to find balance within their day.
Yeah.
It's oftentimes out of balance. We're working oftentimes for 12 to 14 hours. There's some people are only sleeping for 3 hours, or some people are sleeping for 10 because they're so exhausted, but there's no time for play. So it's just trying to find these balances again within our life, and that's all the discussion that we need to start having with people.
Yes. Is there anything else you wanted to cover before I ask where people can find you for the anti-aging and longevity work that you do?
No, I think it's more about the understanding of the difference between, say, the anti-aging that people hear about, which is your nips, your tucks, your surgical procedures, the Botox, the cosmetic
that never
surgery.
occurred to me.
Yeah, so that's anti-aging. That's what most people think of as anti-aging. But that's, to me, I class it as icing on a rotten cake. Yeah. So inside, the cake's got all worms and weevils in it, but the outside is looking pretty fantastic. Longevity is an inside problem. We do have to be working on the inside from a cellular perspective, an electrical perspective, a spiritual perspective. So these things are important, not just not concentrating on that outside. So it's just that distinguishing process. So I call myself an age hacker or a longevity hacker, as opposed to as opposed to an anti-aging specialist, which the cosmetic surgeries are everywhere.
Yeah.
So it's about trying to get that inside right. That is going to give us extra years or decades to how long we can live. And as I said, over 100 years of age. On my Facebook page, I actually put up a couple of people in their 90s and in their hundreds that are doing athletics still. You know, one woman was 95. She just broke the world record 13-minute mile. So
Fantastic.
she didn't even look puffed when she was finished. You know, it's just things like that inspire us. We can be like that if we put the effort in now.
Yeah, I had an old guy called Jerry who came to see me. I had no experience. And he walked through the door and he was on 27 medications. He just nursed his wife with cancer over the previous 8 years. And he'd had heart attacks. So he wasn't allowed to, there was something he wasn't allowed to do until he could walk up 13 steps, and he couldn't do it to save himself. Anyway, so we started working with him, and every time he'd get on the massage table, and I do Bowen therapy and some kinesia and stuff on him. And bit by bit, because he would walk, no word of a lie, he was so bent over walking. You know, I used to joke, I'd see him park across the road and I'd go put a cup of tea on by the time he got in there. Anyway, so by the time he finished, he had goals of walking up some of the mountains on the way to Bribey Island. Yep. And he did them all. And he was just so straight and long.
I love that.
That's by the time he did pass. But It was just amazing watching this broken man go off all his medication, turn his life around, climb a few damn mountains.
Yep.
Like, it was just phenomenal.
And then oftentimes what we're looking for is then, passing on in our sleep.
Yeah.
Rather than this, 8, 10, 12 years of decline and further, in disability, yes. It's about having a fantastic life and a good quality of life right up until the time we pass.
Absolutely.
That's good health.
Absolutely. So how do people find you, Peter, if they want to work with?
Yes, so thank you for asking. At this stage, I am doing a new website up around the longevity. That's got all this new information to be going in, research centres, questionnaires that people can be doing, lots of podcasts, lots of interesting information, just to get an understanding about the longevity process and what you can do personally. But at the moment, you can go through to my Facebook pages, Peter Kahler. I'm constantly putting research up there, inspiring, motivational, interesting science stuff. Some of it might put you to sleep with the science stuff, but the inspirational stuff's really fun, to read through and to watch the videos. So Peter Kahler, and also to my naturopathic clinic, Oxford Naturopathics and Wellness Centre. So you can go in there. I've got a Facebook page there as well. You can contact us through that if you're wanting to look at medicines or a consultation with regards to health and well-being and longevity. You can go through Oxford Naturopathics website as well.
Beautiful.
So Peter Kahler Facebook, Oxford Naturopathics website.
Fantastic. So lovely to have you on the program today, Peter.
Thank you, Madonna. I've enjoyed it. It's not often that we get to just sort of do the on the couch type discussion about these things. Normally, it's quite technical and scientific and and quite in depth. So I really enjoyed this. It was very, very, very good fun.
Yeah, good stuff. And I'll talk to you again soon. I think I would like to have a chat one day about the other shenanigans going on the planet and how we can help people.
Yep, absolutely. No, be a pleasure.
Beautiful.
Thanks, Madonna.
Excellent. Okay, thanks, Peter. Have a fab day.
Yep, bye. Bye.
Oh.